Johnny Tremain, Chapter 3, Part 5. Alas, a couple more questions to guide your reading and thoughts. Number 1, where is Johnny's mother buried? And number 2, what is Johnny's new plan to find work? Part 5. Now that he was sure that what they all felt Isana had been young enough to say, he felt his heart was broken. Once again, he started to walk until he was so tired he could not think. The long, late September night had already begun before he reached the town gates on the neck. Beyond him, in the semi-darkness, running across mud flats, was the one road which connected Boston with the mainland, and here the gallows, on which Mrs. Lapham promised him to end. He turned back from the lonely place. The gallows and the graves of suicides frightened him a little. He wandered about through the salt marshes at the foot of the common, circling until he came out on Beacon Hill. There he sat in an orchard for quite a while. It was either Mr. Light's or Mr. Hancock's, for the houses stood side by side. He saw the glitter of candles throughout the great mansions, guests coming and going, heard the music of a spinet. Isana's words rang in his ears. He who had struggled hard never to cry now wished that he could. Then he walked off into sparsely settled West Boston. Behind the pest house by lantern light, men were digging a hurried grave. He left West Boston and, skirting Dirty Mill Cove, came at last into his own North Boston. On Hull Street, he heard the staves of the town watch and the feet of the watchmen clumping on cobbles. By law, no apprentice was allowed out so late. He slipped into Copp's Hill graveyard to hide until they were gone. 1 o'clock and a warm, fair night, called the watch. It was indeed warm and fair, and no hardship to spend such a night out under the moon and stars. Around about him everywhere lay the dead worthies of Boston. Their slate stones stood shoulder to shoulder. This was the highest land in Boston, next only to Beacon Hill. Here, close to Hull Street, his mother was buried in an unmarked grave. He had not forgotten where, and flung himself down beside the spot. Then he began to cry. He had not been able to cry before. It was as if Isana's words had broken down the last strength in him. He cried half for himself, and half because he knew how sorry his mother would be for him if she knew. I can't do decent work. I can't ever be a silversmith, not even a watchmaker. My friends don't want me to touch them with my dreadful hand. Seemingly, neither the moon nor the stars above him, nor the dead about him, cared. Then he lay face down, sobbing and saying over and over that God had turned away from him. But his frenzied weeping had given him some release. He must have slept. He sat up, suddenly awake. The moon had seemingly come close and closer to him. He could see the coat of arms, the winged death's heads on the slate stones about him. He was so wide awake, he felt someone must have called his name. His ears were straining to hear the next words. What was it his mother had said so long ago? If there was nothing left, and God himself had turned away his face, then, and only then, Johnny was to go to Mr. Light. In his ears rang his mother's sweet remembered accents. Surely for 1 second, between sleeping and waking, he had seen her dear face, loving, gentle, intelligent, floating toward him through the moonlight on Copp's Hill. He sat a long time with his arms hugging his knees. Now he knew what to do. This very day he would go to Merchant Light. When at last he lay down, he slept heavily, without a dream and without a worry.